For 30 years, Patricia Williams walked into a maximum security prison every single day, not as an inmate, not as a guard, but as a teacher who believed that everyone deserves a second chance. She taught men who society had given up on, men behind bars serving decades, some with life sentences. And she didn't just teach them to read, she taught them to hope. Over 3 decades, 3,000 inmates sat in her classroom. 847 of them went to college after their release. But it wasn't until she walked onto the Family Feud stage that Steve Harvey discovered the most impossible secret of all. Mrs. Williams had taught Steve Harvey's nephew, the young man who turned his life around, who Steve credited with showing him that redemption was real. That man had sat in Patricia Williams' prison classroom 8 years ago, and neither of them knew the other existed until this moment. Subscribe right now, because when Steve Harvey realizes who this woman is, everything changes. Let me take you back to where this extraordinary story began. Not on a game show stage in Atlanta, but in a maximum security prison in Illinois 30 years ago. Patricia Williams was 38 years old when she made the decision that would define the rest of her life. She'd been teaching high school English in a comfortable suburban school for 12 years. Good salary, great students, supportive parents. It was everything a teacher could want. But Patricia felt a pull towards something more, something harder, something that mattered in a way she couldn't quite explain. One day, she saw a job posting, high school equivalency teacher needed, Oakdale Correctional Facility, maximum security prison, teaching inmates who dropped out of school, many of whom could barely read. The pay was less than what she made. The environment would be dangerous. Most teachers lasted less than a year before quitting. Patricia applied anyway. Her family thought she was crazy. "Pat, you have a good job. Why would you throw that away to teach criminals?" "Because," Patricia said simply, "those criminals are still people, and people deserve education." On her first day at Oakdale, Patricia walked through 6 locked doors, each clanging shut behind her with finality. She passed cells where men shouted obscenities. She walked by guards who told her she wouldn't last a month. She entered a classroom with peeling paint, broken desks, and 15 inmates who looked at her with everything from hostility to indifference. "My name is Mrs. Williams," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to teach you, not because you have to learn, not because the state requires it, but because I believe every single one of you has potential you haven't discovered yet. I believe you can change your life, and I'm going to help you do it." One inmate, a 28-year-old serving 20 years for armed robbery, laughed. "Lady, I'm a convict. Society don't want us to have potential." Patricia looked him in the eyes. "Then we'll prove society wrong, starting today." That inmate's name was Raymond. 2 years later, he earned his GED. 4 years after that, he completed an associate's degree through a prison program. When he was released after 15 years, he enrolled in a 4-year university. Today, Raymond is a social worker helping at-risk youth. He credits Mrs. Williams with saving his life. And Raymond was just one of 847. Patricia looked him in the eyes. "Then we'll prove society wrong, starting today." That inmate's name was Raymond. 2 years later, he earned his GED. 4 years after that, he completed an associate's degree through a prison program. When he was released after 15 years, he enrolled in a 4-year university. Today, Raymond is a social worker helping at-risk youth. He credits Mrs. Williams with saving his life. And Raymond was just one of 847. For 3 decades, Patricia Williams showed up, through budget cuts that eliminated art programs and reduced resources, through lockdowns when violence erupted, through days when inmates cursed at her, refused to participate, told her she was wasting her time. She showed up. She taught men in their 20s who'd never learned to read properly. She taught men in their 40s who dropped out in 6th grade. She taught men serving life sentences who would never walk free but wanted to learn anyway because learning gave them dignity. She didn't just teach English and math. She taught hope. She taught that your past doesn't define your future. She taught that behind bars doesn't mean behind in life. Every year, Patricia would celebrate her students' achievements. GED ceremonies in a prison gymnasium, with men in orange jumpsuits walking across a stage to receive diplomas while their families cried in the audience. Some of those men had children who'd never seen their father succeed at anything. Patricia made sure those kids saw their dads graduate. Over 30 years, 3,000 men sat in Patricia's classroom. Not all of them succeeded. Some gave up. Some got transferred to other facilities. Some were released and fell back into old patterns. But 847 didn't. 847 men earned college degrees after walking out of Oakdale Correctional Facility. Some got associate's degrees, some got bachelor's. 92 got master's degrees, 14 became lawyers. Men who'd been convicted of crimes, served their time, earned their education, passed the bar, and became advocates for criminal justice reform. 6 of Patricia's former students became teachers themselves, going into schools and prisons to do for others what Mrs. Williams had done for them. And one of those 3,000 students was Marcus Harvey. Marcus Harvey was 22 years old when he was sentenced to 5 years in Oakdale for drug trafficking. He'd grown up in Southside Chicago, dropped out of high school at 16, and fell into the life that claimed so many young men in his neighborhood. Prison was supposed to break him. Instead, it saved him. On his 3rd day at Oakdale, a guard told Marcus he had to attend GED classes. "I don't need school," Marcus said. "I'm getting out in 5 years and going back to my life." The guard laughed. "Yeah? And how'd that life work out for you?" Marcus showed up to Mrs. Williams' class angry. He sat in the back, arms crossed, refusing to participate. Patricia didn't push, she just taught. Day after day, she taught lessons about grammar, about history, about math, and slowly Marcus started listening. One day, Patricia was teaching about the Harlem Renaissance. She talked about Langston Hughes, about how he wrote about the dignity and dreams of Black Americans during a time when society tried to deny both. Marcus raised his hand for the first time. "Mrs. Williams, can I borrow that book?" Patricia smiled. "You can keep it." That book changed Marcus's life. He started reading everything Patricia gave him. Hughes, Baldwin, Morrison, Angelou. He started writing his own poetry. And somewhere in those pages, Marcus discovered that he wasn't just a drug dealer from Chicago. He was a young man with a mind, with potential, with a future. He earned his GED in 18 months. Then he started taking college courses through a prison education program. By the time Marcus was released at 27, he had an associate's degree and had been accepted to a 4-year university. Before he left Oakdale, Marcus found Mrs. Williams in her classroom. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Patricia hugged him. "Thank me by living well. Thank me by proving that second chances matter." Marcus did exactly that. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in communications. He got an internship at a media company. He worked his way up, and 8 years after leaving Oakdale, Marcus Harvey was working in television production, proud, successful, and grateful for the teacher who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Marcus's uncle was proud too. His uncle who'd helped him get that first internship, his uncle who'd watched Marcus transform from an angry ex-convict into a man with purpose. His uncle, Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey didn't talk publicly about Marcus's past. That was Marcus's story to tell, not his. But privately, Steve credited Marcus with teaching him something important. People can change, redemption is real, and second chances save lives. Steve had no idea who gave Marcus that second chance. Marcus had mentioned a teacher at Oakdale, an older woman who wouldn't give up on him, but Steve had never asked her name. It hadn't seemed important until Patricia Williams walked onto the Family Feud stage. Patricia was there with her family, her daughter, son-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. She'd retired from Oakdale 6 months earlier after 30 years. This was supposed to be a celebration, a fun family experience to mark the start of her retirement. Steve Harvey started with his usual introductions, working down the line of contestants. When he got to Patricia, he noticed something about her, a calmness, a warmth, the bearing of someone who'd spent decades doing something meaningful. "And you must be Patricia," Steve said with his signature smile. "Tell me about yourself, ma'am." "Hi, Steve. I'm 68, just retired, and I spent the last 30 years as a teacher." "A teacher? I love teachers. My teachers changed my life." "What grade did you teach?" "High school equivalency," Patricia said, "at Oakdale Correctional Facility." The audience went quiet for a moment, then burst into applause. Steve's eyebrows raised. "You taught in a prison?" "Yes, sir. maximum security, for 30 years. Steve shook his head in amazement. Mrs. Williams, that takes a special kind of person. How many students did you teach over those years? Patricia thought for a moment. A little over 3,000. The audience applauded again. Steve smiled, ready to move on. But something made him ask one more question. Maybe curiosity, maybe fate. Mrs. Williams, out of those 3,000 men, how many do you think made something of themselves after they got out? Patricia's eyes welled up slightly. 847 of them went to college after their release. I keep track when I can. 92 earned master's degrees, 14 became lawyers, 6 became teachers, and all of them, her voice cracked, all of them proved that people deserve second chances. The studio erupted in applause. People were on their feet. Even the production crew was clapping. Steve Harvey stood there, genuinely moved. Mrs. Williams, that is incredible. That is truly incredible. You changed 847 lives. More than that, Patricia said softly. I changed their families' lives, their children's lives. Every person who chose education over returning to crime, they changed their entire family tree. Steve nodded, wiping his eyes with his pocket square. You're an angel, Mrs. Williams. A genuine angel. He was about to move to the next contestant when he heard a voice from the audience, a voice he recognized. Uncle Steve. Steve turned toward the audience. In the third row, standing up, was Marcus Harvey, his nephew, who wasn't supposed to be at this taping, who was supposed to be in Chicago working. Marcus, what are you doing here, nephew? Marcus wasn't looking at Steve. He was looking at Patricia Williams. Uncle Steve, Marcus said, his voice breaking. That's her. That's Mrs. Williams. That's my teacher from Oakdale. Steve Harvey froze. He looked at Patricia, then at Marcus, then back at Patricia. What did you say? Marcus was walking down the aisle now, toward the stage. Mrs. Williams taught me at Oakdale 8 years ago. She's the reason I got my GED. She's the reason I went to college. She's the reason I'm standing here today. Patricia's hands flew to her mouth. Marcus? Marcus Harvey? Yes, ma'am. Oh my God, you're Steve Harvey's nephew? I had no idea. You never mentioned. Steve Harvey set his cards down. His hands were shaking. Hold on, Mrs. Williams. You taught Marcus. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. He was one of my brightest students, so much potential. I knew he'd do something special with his life. Steve looked at his nephew, then at this 68-year-old woman standing on his stage. The woman who'd spent 30 years in a maximum security prison teaching men that society had thrown away. The woman who'd taught 3,000 inmates. The woman who'd changed 847 lives, including the life of his nephew. Steve Harvey walked off his mark. He walked straight to Patricia Williams, and he did something he'd never done in over 2,000 episodes of Family Feud. He got down on one knee in front of her. Mrs. Williams, Steve said, his voice thick with emotion. I need you to understand something. Marcus is my nephew. When he got out of prison 8 years ago, he was angry. He was lost. He had a degree, but he didn't have hope. I helped him get a job, but I couldn't give him what he really needed. Someone already had. Steve's voice broke. You gave him belief. You gave him purpose. You taught him that his life wasn't over just because he'd made mistakes. And because of that, I got to watch my nephew become a man I'm proud of. A man who works hard. A man who gives back. A man who proves every day that second chances matter. The audience was crying. Patricia was crying. Marcus was crying. Even the camera operators were wiping their eyes. Steve stood up and pulled Patricia into a hug. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for my nephew. Thank you for 847 men. Thank you for 30 years of showing up when nobody else would. Then Steve turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not playing a game today. We're celebrating a hero. Mrs. Patricia Williams spent 30 years in a maximum security prison, not as an inmate, but as an angel. She taught men that the world had given up on. She taught them that education is freedom. She taught them that they matter. He gestured to Marcus. Come up here, nephew. Marcus climbed onto the stage. Steve put one arm around Patricia and one arm around Marcus. This is what redemption looks like, Steve said to the cameras. This is what happens when one teacher refuses to give up. When one woman walks into danger every day for 30 years because she believes in second chances, Mrs. Williams didn't just teach my nephew to read, she taught him to hope, and that hope changed everything. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Steve Harvey made another unprecedented decision. He canceled the game. "We're not competing today," he announced. "Both families are going to share the prize money equally. But more than that, we're going to celebrate Mrs. Williams properly." He turned to the producers. "Get me a phone. I want to call Oakdale." For the next 20 minutes, Steve Harvey called the warden at Oakdale Correctional Facility. He called the education director. He called 3 of Patricia's former students who were now working as lawyers, teachers, and counselors. He put them on speakerphone so the entire studio could hear. One by one, Patricia's former students told their stories. Men who'd been drug dealers, armed robbers, men who'd thought their lives were over, men who sat in Mrs. Williams' classroom and learned that education could open doors that prison had tried to close. "Mrs. Williams taught me that my past didn't define my future," one former student said over the phone. "I'm a lawyer now. I defend men just like I used to be. And I tell every single one of them about the teacher who believed in me." Another said, "I hadn't read a book since I was 12 years old. Mrs. Williams gave me the autobiography of Malcolm X. That book changed my life. I'm a teacher now because of her." By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Steve Harvey turned to Patricia. "Mrs. Williams, you spent 30 years giving. Today we're giving back." He pulled out an envelope. "This is from the Family Feud producers, from me personally, and from every person in this studio who just heard your story. This is $50,000 for you and your family. Not because we have to, because we want to, because 30 years of changing lives deserves to be celebrated." Patricia broke down. Her family surrounded her. Marcus came over and hugged his former teacher, and Steve Harvey stood there watching redemption happen in real time. The episode aired 2 months later and became the most watched Family Feud in history. Over 18 million people watched Patricia Williams tell her story. Over 18 million people learned about the teacher who spent 30 years in prison changing lives. But more importantly, the episode sparked a movement. Prison education programs across America reported a 300% increase in funding requests. Volunteers flooded into facilities wanting to teach. Lawmakers began proposing bills to expand educational opportunities for inmates. The Patricia Williams Second Chance Foundation was established to fund education programs in prisons nationwide. Within 1 year, it raised $4.2 million. Within 3 years, it had helped launch education programs in 47 prisons across 23 states. Patricia Williams became a national advocate for prison education. She spoke at conferences, testified before Congress, and told her story to anyone who would listen. Education is the key to breaking the cycle. You can't expect people to change if you don't give them the tools to change. Marcus Harvey started mentoring young men coming out of prison, helping them navigate re-entry the way his uncle had helped him. He speaks at schools and youth centers telling his story. "I was a drug dealer who couldn't read past a 6th grade level. Mrs. Williams taught me that I was more than my worst mistake. Now I teach others the same thing." And Steve Harvey? He became one of the biggest supporters of prison education reform in America. He donated millions to prison education programs. He featured formerly incarcerated students on his show. He used his platform to spread Patricia's message, "Second chances save lives." "That day on Family Feud changed me," Steve said in an interview. "I thought I was just hosting a game show, but I learned that my nephew's success story, the story I'd been proud of for years, was made possible by a 68-year-old teacher who spent 30 years believing in men that nobody else believed in. That's not just teaching. That's ministry." Patricia Williams is 71 now. She still speaks at events, still advocates for prison education, but mostly she enjoys her retirement with her grandchildren, proud of the legacy she built. She keeps a wall in her home, covered with photos, 847 photos, one for each student who earned a college degree after Oakdale. Some sent her their graduation pictures, some sent photos of their families, some sent pictures of themselves at work, in careers they never thought possible. Marcus Harvey visits her every few months. He brings his Uncle Steve sometimes. They sit in Patricia's living room, drinking tea, talking about life and redemption and the power of believing in people. I still can't believe you're Steve Harvey's nephew. Patricia laughs every time. I can't believe I found you after all these years, Marcus replies. Steve just shakes his head. What are the odds? Out of thousands of Family Feud contestants, my nephew's teacher ends up on my stage. That's not coincidence. That's divine appointment. Patricia's daughter asked her once if she regretted spending 30 years in a prison instead of a comfortable suburban school. Patricia's answer was immediate, not for 1 second. I spent 30 years watching men transform. I watched them walk into my classroom defeated and walk out with hope. I watched 847 of them build new lives. That's not a career, that's a calling. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because this isn't just about a teacher in a prison. This isn't just about a game show coincidence. This isn't even just about Steve Harvey discovering his nephew's teacher. This is about what happens when one person decides that everyone deserves a second chance. When one teacher spends 30 years walking into a maximum security prison because she believes that education can transform lives. Patricia Williams could have had an easier career. She could have taught in safe schools with supportive parents and students who wanted to learn. Instead, she chose the hardest classroom in America. She chose men that society had written off. She chose to believe in people when nobody else would. And because of that choice, 847 men changed their lives. They went to college. They became lawyers, teachers, counselors, fathers, mentors. They broke cycles of incarceration in their families. They proved that prison doesn't have to be the end of the story. Marcus Harvey was one of those 847, and because Patricia believed in him, he got to build a life. He got to make his uncle proud. He got to prove that young men who make mistakes at 22 aren't defined by those mistakes forever. So the next time you wonder if one person can make a difference, remember Patricia Williams. Remember the woman who taught 3,000 inmates. Remember the 847 who went to college. Remember the nephew who found his teacher on his uncle's stage. Because that's what dedication looks like. That's what second chances sound like. And that's what happens when one teacher refuses to give up on people the world has forgotten. Patricia Williams didn't just teach English and math. She taught hope. She taught dignity. She taught 3,000 men that their lives still mattered, even behind bars. And 847 of them believed her.